People always think cruelty arrives loudly with shouting, slammed doors, dramatic scenes. But that isn't how it happened for me. It happened quietly, after my son died, after the house went silent. After grief had already hollowed me out enough that I didn't have the strength to argue, to beg, or even to ask why. My daughter-in-law didn't scream when she threw me out. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She simply looked at me, calm, composed, already finished with her morning, and told me I needed to leave. That was the moment everything changed. Because what she didn't know, what no one knew at the time, was that my son had planned for this exact moment. And the will he left behind had one final clause that would turn her smirk into silence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the lawyer paused, before the sealed envelope, before the room went cold, there was the funeral. And before that, the phone call that shattered my life. If you've ever stayed silent when someone expected you to break, if you've ever been underestimated when you were at your weakest, you'll understand why I'm sharing this story. And before we continue, if stories like this resonate with you, stories about patience, quiet strength, and karma arriving without force, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Not for revenge stories, but for stories where dignity wins. Now let me tell you how it all began. The call came at 3:12 a.m. That time stays with you when it changes your life. The phone rang once, twice, and something in my chest tightened before I even picked it up. "Mom," Daniel's voice was strained, too thin, like he was trying not to scare me. "I don't feel right," he said. My chest, then silence. I said his name again and again into the phone, my hands already shaking, my heart already knowing what my mind refused to accept. By the time I reached the hospital, it was over. A massive heart attack, they said, sudden. No warning signs, 46 years old, healthy, gone. I stood there in the emergency room, staring at a doctor's lips moving, unable to hear anything past the roar in my ears. My son was dead, my only child. The world didn't stop spinning, and somehow that felt like a betrayal. Claire, my daughter-in-law, stood beside me. She wore black, perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. She held my arm for exactly 30 seconds, long enough for the nurses to see, then gently removed her hand. Her eyes were dry. At the time, I told myself everyone grieves differently. Some people collapse. Some people go numb. Some people turn practical. Claire turned very practical. "We'll need to make arrangements," she said softly, already pulling out her phone. "I'll handle it." I nodded because I didn't have the strength to argue. I didn't yet realize that was the moment she decided the rest of my life. The funeral was 3 days later. It was beautiful. Daniel would have liked it. The music was right. The flowers were tasteful. The speeches were polished. Claire moved through the room like she belonged there, thanking guests, accepting condolences, holding herself together just enough to look admirable. I stood off to the side, smiling when spoken to, nodding when appropriate, feeling like a guest in my own son's goodbye. That night, after the last car pulled away and the house finally fell quiet, Claire found me sitting in the guest room I'd been using since moving in 2 years earlier. "Eleanor," she said, folding her arms. "We need to talk." Her tone wasn't unkind. That's what made it worse. "This house is legally mine now," she continued. "It's too soon for complications." Complications, that's what she called me. "I need space," she said. "And privacy. I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay." I stared at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Waiting for temporary. Waiting for "we'll figure something out." Waiting for Daniel would have wanted, but nothing came. "How long?" I asked quietly. She tilted her head, considering. "Tomorrow evening should be enough time to pack." Tomorrow, the day after my son's funeral, I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I didn't remind her that I had sold my own home to help them with their down payment. I didn't remind her that Daniel had begged me to stay, saying, "You'll always have a place here, Mom." I simply nodded. And that confused her more than anger ever could have. I packed my life into 4 suitcases. 68 years reduced to what fit in the trunk of my car. Claire stood in the doorway the entire time, arms crossed, watching the clock like a landlord waiting for a tenant to vacate. At exactly 6 o'clock, she cleared her throat. "Time." When I carried my last bag to the car, she followed me outside. I turned, hoping foolishly for a shred of humanity. "Will there be a will reading?" I asked. "I assume Daniel," she laughed, not loudly, just enough to sting. "Why would there be anything for you?" she said. "You're not his wife." Then she smiled. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. She thought she had won. She thought I was finished. She thought I was about to disappear quietly. I drove away without looking back, checked into a small hotel off the highway, sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror. A grieving mother, homeless. Dismissed, and yet beneath the pain, something else stirred. Because my son had been many things, thoughtful, careful, protective, and Daniel had never left anything unfinished. 2 weeks later, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't tragedy on the line. It was a lawyer, and everything Claire believed was about to collapse. The first night in the hotel was the hardest. Not because of the room, it was clean enough, quiet enough, but because of the silence. At Daniel's house, even after his death, there had been sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock in the hallway, Claire's footsteps moving with purpose as if life hadn't cracked open beneath her feet. Here, there was nothing. Just me, 4 suitcases, and the sudden understanding that grief doesn't end when the funeral does, it settles in and waits. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Claire's words over and over. Why would there be anything for you? Not said with anger, not even with cruelty, just certainty. She was already counting what was hers. I stayed at that hotel longer than I planned. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a few days to breathe, to grieve, to think. But each morning I woke up with the same weight in my chest and the same question: what do I do now? I had a small pension from my years as a school librarian, social security, enough to survive, but not enough to start over comfortably at my age. I spent hours scrolling through rental listings on my phone, tiny studios, senior housing waitlists, places that felt less like homes and more like holding cells. Every option reminded me of something painful, too small, too expensive, too final, and through it all, Claire never called, not once. What hurt most wasn't being thrown out, it was how easily she erased me. 2 years, that's how long I'd lived under that roof. I cooked meals, watched the house when they traveled, paid utilities when money was tight, gave them $40,000 for the down payment when they said they'd never qualify otherwise. But once Daniel was gone, I wasn't family anymore. I was clutter. I remembered small things then, details I'd brushed off before. The way Claire corrected me in front of guests. The way my things slowly disappeared from shared spaces. The way Daniel always squeezed my hand under the table when she spoke sharply. At the time, I thought he was just trying to keep the peace. Now I wondered if he'd been apologizing. The call from the lawyer came on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, balancing my checkbook when my phone rang. "Mrs. Fairfield?" a man's voice asked. Calm, professional. "Yes," I said, bracing myself. "This is James Carter. I'm your son's attorney." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "I'm calling to inform you that the probate process has reached the next stage," he continued. "There will be a formal reading of Daniel's will next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Your presence is required." Required, that word echoed. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "I think there may be a mistake." "My daughter-in-law said, Mrs. Fairfield," he interrupted gently, "your son specifically requested that you be present." I felt something shift inside me, not hope, not yet, something steadier, curiosity. After the call ended, I sat very still. Daniel had requested my presence. That meant something. Claire had made it very clear she expected nothing to go to me, which meant either Daniel had left me something small, a keepsake, a letter, something sentimental. Or Claire didn't know everything. The days leading up to the will reading passed slowly. I imagined the scene over and over. Claire seated confidently, her lawyer beside her, me sitting quietly at the end of the table, bracing myself for disappointment. I told myself not to expect too much. I told myself I would be grateful for anything. But deep down, something else was growing, not excitement, recognition. Daniel had always been deliberate. If he'd wanted me there, there was a reason. The morning of the will reading, I wore a navy blue dress I'd owned for years. Nothing flashy, nothing new. I wanted to look like myself, not someone trying to prove anything. When I arrived at the law office, Claire was already there. She looked composed, black dress, perfect hair, a faint smirk when she saw me walk in. She leaned toward the receptionist. "Why is she here?" The receptionist glanced at her clipboard. "Both Mrs. Fairfield and Mrs. Fairfield are expected." Claire's jaw tightened. She didn't speak to me, didn't acknowledge me at all. She didn't have to. Her confidence spoke loudly enough. The lawyer ushered us into a conference room precisely at 2 o'clock. There was a large wooden table. Legal folders neatly stacked, a sense of formality that made my stomach twist. Claire sat forward, hands folded, already victorious in her mind. The lawyer began reading. House to Claire, vehicles to Claire, life insurance to Claire, retirement accounts to Claire. With each item, she relaxed further. Occasionally, she glanced at me, not with pity but with something like amusement. As if this were a lesson, as if I were finally learning my place. Then the lawyer paused. He removed his glasses, and something in the room changed. There is, he said carefully, one final clause. Claire straightened. I felt my pulse quicken. To my mother, he continued, I leave the contents of safety deposit box 317 held at First National Bank along with all associated documents and accounts contained therein. The room went silent. Claire blinked. What safety deposit box? She snapped. The lawyer looked up. Your husband maintained it privately? That's impossible, she said sharply. He never mentioned. He didn't need to, the lawyer replied calmly. It is legally his to designate. He turned to me and slid an envelope across the table. These documents will allow you access to the box once the bank completes verification. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Claire was staring at it like it might explode. This is ridiculous, she said, standing abruptly. There's probably nothing in there. Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, but the certainty she'd carried into the room was gone. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt steady. In the parking lot, she finally spoke to me. We should go to the bank together, she said tightly. Whatever's in there belongs to the estate. I met her eyes calmly. Daniel was very clear, I said, and so was the lawyer. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Don't forget, she whispered, you're homeless, you need goodwill. I smiled just a little. You're assuming I still need anything from you? Her face hardened. 3 business days. That's how long the bank said it would take. 3 days for paperwork, 3 days for Claire to wonder, 3 days for the past to catch up with her. Because my son hadn't just planned for my future. He'd planned for her truth. And I was about to open the box that would change everything. The bank smelled like polished wood and quiet authority, the kind of place where voices naturally lower and secrets feel heavier just by being inside. I arrived 10 minutes early, clutching the envelope Daniel's lawyer had given me as if it might disappear if I loosened my grip. Claire had texted me twice that morning, short messages that pretended to be polite but pulsed with urgency beneath every word. Let me know when you're going. We should talk before you do anything. I didn't respond. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting to her timeline. I was following my son's. The banker, a woman in her 50s with soft eyes and practiced professionalism, verified my ID and reviewed the documents carefully. She didn't rush me. She didn't question why my hands were shaking. When she finally nodded and said, "Everything is in order, Mrs. Fairfield," I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. She led me through a secure door into a quiet corridor lined with numbered steel boxes, each one holding someone else's untold story. When we stopped in front of the box, she explained the process, inserted her master key, and waited for me to use Daniel's. The lock turned smoothly. The box slid free with a muted scrape, heavier than I expected. "You may take your time," she said gently, escorting me into a private room and closing the door behind us. I sat there for a moment without opening it, my palms resting on the cool metal, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone outside could hear it. I thought of Daniel as a boy, the way he used to organize his toy cars by color and size, the way he planned ahead even then. Whatever was inside this box, it hadn't been placed there on a whim. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a letter, neatly folded, my name written across the front in my son's unmistakable handwriting. My throat tightened as I picked it up, suddenly afraid of what it might say. I opened it slowly. "Mom," it began, "if you're reading this, then things happened the way I hoped they wouldn't but prepared for anyway." I had to stop for a moment, pressing my fingers against my lips. He knew. He had known. The letter continued, calm and steady, just like him. He wrote that he loved me, that he was sorry he hadn't always spoken up when he should have, that he saw more than I realized. He wrote that he wanted me protected, not just financially but emotionally, from what he feared would happen once he was gone. As I read, tears blurred the words, but I didn't stop. Under the letter were documents, neatly labeled, organized with care, bank statements, investment summaries, account numbers. I didn't understand them at first, not fully, but I understood enough to see that this wasn't symbolic. This wasn't sentimental, this was deliberate. There was money there, not a fortune, but far more than I expected, enough to change everything. I flipped through the pages, my breath shallow, my mind racing back through the past 2 years, through every moment Claire had spoken about money as if it were scarce, as if my presence had been a burden. And then I saw it, a smaller envelope tucked beneath the paperwork labeled simply documentation. My stomach tightened. Inside were printed emails, text message screenshots, dates, and timestamps clearly marked. Claire's words stared back at me, stripped of tone, stripped of context, raw and undeniable. Complaints about me, jokes about how long I'd last, plans discussed casually with her brother about what happens after. I felt something inside me settle, like a final piece clicking into place. This wasn't grief-driven cruelty, this was long-planned indifference. I sat back in the chair, the room suddenly too quiet, the weight of my son's foresight pressing down on me. He hadn't just left me money, he'd left me clarity. When I finally left the bank, the envelope secured in my bag, my phone buzzed almost immediately. Claire, I let it ring. Then another message came through. We need to talk today. I stood in the parking lot, the sun warm on my face, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt grounded. I wasn't angry, I wasn't scared, I was informed. That afternoon, I checked out of the hotel, not because I had a new place yet, but because I no longer felt like someone waiting to be rescued. I drove to a quiet cafe, ordered tea, and spread the documents out on the table, reading them carefully, one by one, letting the truth settle fully before deciding my next step. Claire texted again. Please don't do anything without me. I smiled faintly. She had spent years doing exactly that. That evening, I booked another week at the hotel, but this time it felt different. Temporary, yes, but no longer desperate. I slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep that only comes when uncertainty finally has edges. The next morning, Claire called. I answered. Eleanor, she said, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. I was thinking maybe we should have lunch. Talk things through. I looked out the window at the quiet street below. That sounds fine, I said. And in that moment, I realized something important. She thought this conversation was about negotiation. She thought this was where she regained control. She had no idea that the story she believed she was writing had already been edited, signed, and sealed by the one person she underestimated the most. My son. And the next time we sat across from each other, it wouldn't be me asking for understanding. It would be her realizing that everything she thought she knew was incomplete, and that the final clause wasn't just in the will, it was in the truth. I arrived at Claire's house exactly at noon. Not early, not late. She opened the door before I even knocked. Her smile appeared first, wide, carefully practiced. Eleanor, she said warmly, as if nothing had ever happened. As if she hadn't thrown me out with my life in suitcases. The house looked the same, clean, bright, cold. I stepped inside slowly, taking in the familiar space. The living room where I used to fold laundry. The dining table where I'd cooked dinners no one thanked me for. Claire gestured toward the kitchen. I made lunch, your favorite. I noticed how her tone had changed, gentle, careful. This wasn't kindness, it was strategy. We sat across from each other. The table between us felt like a border. She poured tea with trembling hands, not grief, not exhaustion, fear. So, she began lightly, did you manage to get into the safety deposit box? I nodded once. Her fingers tightened around the teacup, just for a second. And, she pressed, trying to sound casual. I took a sip of tea before answering, let the silence stretch. It was enlightening, I said calmly, her eyes sharpened. What does that mean? It means Daniel was more observant than either of us realized. She laughed softly, a brittle sound. He always was private, she said. You know how men are with finances. I tilted my head. Do you really believe that? She froze. I reached into my purse and placed the folder on the table, not opened, just visible. Her gaze locked onto it instantly. What's that? She asked too quickly. Documentation, I replied. Her smile slipped, just a crack. Eleanor, she said carefully, whatever's in there, we should discuss it together. As family. Family, the word hung in the air. The day after my son's funeral, I said quietly, you told me I was in your way. She exhaled sharply. That was grief talking? Was it? I asked. I opened the folder just enough for her to see, printed emails, highlighted text, her color drained. You planned my eviction months before Daniel died, I continued. You joked about it. You coordinated it, she stood abruptly. You went through my private messages? No, I corrected. Daniel did. Her knees buckled slightly as she sat back down. He knew, I said. He knew how you spoke about me when you thought no one was listening. She swallowed hard. You don't understand the pressure I was under, she snapped. I was managing everything, the house, the expectations, and I was just taking up space, I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, her tone shifted again. What did he leave you? She asked. Straight to the point now. I closed the folder. That's not your concern. Her eyes flashed. I'm his wife, and I'm his mother. She leaned forward. If there's money involved, we need to handle it responsibly. I smiled faintly. You didn't think I was responsible when I lived here. Her voice rose. You lived here for free? I opened my phone and slid it across the table. A bank statement filled the screen, mortgage payments. Automatic, every month, paid from Daniel's account. Her mouth opened, then closed. He paid the mortgage, I said calmly. Every month, while you told people I contributed nothing. She stared at the screen as if it were burning her. That's not the whole story, she whispered. Oh, it is, I replied. I scrolled. Investment accounts, balances. Her breathing grew shallow. How much? She asked. I turned the screen back toward myself. Enough that I won't ever need to ask you for anything again. She slammed her hand on the table. This is manipulation, she hissed. He turned you against me? No, I said softly. You revealed yourself. Tears filled her eyes now, not sadness, loss of control. You can't do this, she said. You're old. You won't know how to manage it. I stood up slowly. I raised the man who planned this, I replied. I think I'll manage. She stared at me, shaking. What do you want from me? She whispered. I picked up my purse. Nothing. Her face crumpled. Please, she said. We can fix this. I paused at the doorway. You already decided who I was to you, I said quietly. Daniel just made sure I wouldn't be harmed by it. I left without looking back. Outside, the air felt lighter. For the first time since my son died, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was walking forward. And Claire was finally realizing that the power she thought she had was never really hers. The wool wasn't finished speaking yet, and neither was I. I didn't go back to the hotel after leaving Claire's house. Instead, I drove, no destination, just movement. For months, my life had felt like waiting. Waiting to be told where I could stay, waiting to be tolerated. Now, for the first time, I was deciding. I pulled into a quiet park on the edge of town and sat in my car, the engine off, the world still. I let everything sink in. Daniel had known, not guessed, not suspected. Known, he had watched quietly, listened carefully, and prepared. The realization hurt almost as much as it comforted. I thought of all the moments I'd brushed off. All the times I told myself not to make trouble, all the times I stayed silent because I didn't want to cause tension in his marriage. Daniel hadn't needed me to speak. He'd been paying attention all along. My phone buzzed again. Claire. This time I read the message. Please don't make this worse than it has to be. I smiled sadly. She still thought this was a fight, a negotiation. She still believed I wanted something from her. I didn't. That evening I made a call of my own. A realtor. The next morning I toured 3 apartments. Modest, quiet, safe. I chose the second one without hesitation. Sunlight in the kitchen, a small balcony, no memories attached. I signed the lease that afternoon. When I walked back to my car, the keys felt heavy in my palm. Not because they were new, because they were mine. That night I slept deeply. No nightmares, no racing thoughts, just rest. 2 days later, Claire showed up at the hotel. I wasn't there. She left a voicemail. Her voice was tight, controlled. Eleanor, this has gone far enough. We need to talk again. I deleted it. The lawyer called the next morning, Daniel's lawyer. There's one more thing, he said. Your son left instructions for a second meeting with both of you present. I closed my eyes slowly. When? I asked. Tomorrow afternoon. I arrived early. Claire arrived late. She looked different, not polished, not confident, tired. The lawyer greeted us politely and gestured for us to sit. This won't take long, he said. I just need to clarify the final clause. Claire straightened immediately. Final clause. The words seemed to pull her upright. This concerns the house, she said quickly. I assume this is about ownership. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Actually, no, her expression faltered. This concerns occupancy, he continued. And financial responsibility. I felt my breath slow. Daniel had planned further than I imagined. The house, the lawyer read, remains in Claire's name. However, he paused. Claire's fingers curled into fists. The funds used for the down payment were documented as a loan from Alina Fairfield. Claire let out a sharp laugh. That was never formalized. It was, the lawyer replied calmly. With documentation? He slid papers across the desk. Receipts, dates, signatures. Claire stared at them. That loan, he continued, was structured with a deferred repayment clause, activated upon breach of living agreement. My heart thudded softly. Which breach? Claire demanded. Eviction, he replied. The room went very still. The moment Alina was removed from the home, the repayment clause was triggered. Claire's voice shook. That's ridiculous. She was a guest. She was a co-resident, the lawyer corrected. By agreement of all parties. Claire stood abruptly. You can't be serious. I am, he said. The remaining balance is due within 90 days. She turned to me, eyes wild. You did this. I shook my head gently. No, I said quietly. Daniel did. She sank back into her chair. How much? She whispered. The lawyer named the amount, her face drained completely. That's impossible, she said. It's enforceable, he replied. Silence swallowed the room. Finally, Claire looked at me. Please, she said, her voice breaking. I'll let you move back in. We can pretend this never happened. I met her gaze steadily. No, her lips trembled. You'd ruin me, I tilted my head. You already made your choices, I said. I'm just no longer absorbing the consequences for you. She began to cry, not softly, not quietly. Loud, desperate sobs. The lawyer closed his folder gently. We'll be in touch, he said, standing. Outside, the sky was clear. Bright, I walked to my car slowly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. Daniel hadn't left me revenge. He left me boundaries. And for the first time in a long while, I stepped into my future without fear of being pushed out again. The 90 days passed slower than I expected. Not because I was anxious, but because for the first time in a long while, my life was quiet. No one knocking on my door, no one demanding explanations. No one making me feel like I needed permission to exist. My new apartment slowly became a home. I bought a small plant for the balcony, a second-hand armchair I loved, new dishes, simple things. Every time I unlocked the door, I felt something settle inside me. Safety. Claire, on the other hand, was unraveling. I didn't hear it from her directly, I heard it from the lawyer. She's requested an extension, he said one morning. Claims financial hardship? I nodded. She had options, I replied. She just didn't expect consequences. 2 weeks later, she requested mediation. I declined. Another voicemail followed. Her voice sounded thinner now, fractured. Alina, I'm scared, she said. I don't know what to do. I sat on my balcony as I listened, the sun warming my face. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing someone else's fear. The letter came in the mail on a Tuesday, handwritten. I recognized the slanted script immediately. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first, sat at the table, let myself breathe. Then I unfolded the paper. It wasn't long. No accusations, no threats, just regret. She wrote about loneliness, about how the house felt too big now. She wrote about how she hadn't understood how much Daniel had been doing quietly. And finally, she wrote, I thought strength meant control. I see now that it meant care. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not because it changed anything, but because it closed something. The final meeting came quietly, no drama. No raised voices, just paperwork. Claire signed. The repayment was settled through the sale of the house. She didn't look at me when it happened. I didn't need her to. When it was over, the lawyer turned to me. Your son planned very thoroughly, he said. He trusted you. I smiled faintly. He loved me, I replied. That was enough. That night I walked home slowly. The air was cool, the city calm. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago. The one who apologized for taking up space. The one who stayed quiet to keep peace. She felt very far away. A month later, I received one last message from a number I didn't recognize. Alina, this is Claire. I just wanted you to know I'm moving away. I hope you're well. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a single reply. I am, and I meant it. That evening I sat on my balcony again. The plant had grown, new leaves. Bright green, I realized something then. Daniel hadn't just protected me from loss. He had returned something I didn't know I'd lost. My voice, my place, my worth. And as the sun dipped below the buildings, I felt it fully. I was no longer surviving the aftermath of someone else's choices. I was living the life my son believed I deserved. One built not on fear, but on quiet, unshakable dignity. Life didn't change all at once. It softened. Days stopped feeling heavy. Mornings stopped feeling rushed. I found myself waking up before the alarm not because of worry, but because I wanted to. I started walking every morning, nothing dramatic, just around the neighborhood. People nodded, smiled, no one knew my story, and for once that felt good. One afternoon, as I sorted old boxes I'd carried from the hotel, I found something unexpected. A photo album. Daniel as a toddler standing barefoot in the yard. Daniel at his first school play, waving at me from the stage. Daniel at 25, laughing over coffee with me at the kitchen table. I realized something then. My life hadn't ended when my son died. It had changed shape, and I was still here, still standing, still allowed joy. A week later, I ran into someone from the old neighborhood. She hesitated when she saw me, clearly unsure what to say. I heard everything, she said carefully. I nodded. And, I asked gently. She smiled. I heard you handled it with grace. Grace, I thought about that word all evening. Grace wasn't silence. Grace wasn't endurance. Grace was knowing when to step away without shrinking. That night I sat on my balcony with a blanket over my shoulders. The city lights flickered below. I spoke out loud for the first time in months. Thank you, Daniel, not in sadness. In recognition. A letter arrived a few days later from the bank. Everything was finalized. Accounts transferred, loose ends tied. I placed the letter in a folder labeled finished. It felt good to close it. Later that week, I volunteered at the community center. Just 2 afternoons a week, helping with paperwork, teaching basic budgeting classes. Women my age, some older, some scared, some angry, all of them tired of being invisible. I recognized that look, and when they spoke, I listened. Not to fix, not to advise, just to let them know they weren't alone. One woman stayed behind after class. I didn't think starting over was allowed at our age, she whispered. I smiled. It is, I said, you just have to give yourself permission. She cried, so did I, but softly. The kind of tears that clean, not wound. That evening I received one final update from the lawyer. Claire had sold the house. She'd moved out of state, no forwarding address. I read the message twice. Then closed my phone. There was no triumph in it, just closure. People ask me now if I hate her. I don't. Hate takes energy, and I've learned how precious mine is. I don't wish her harm, I wish her understanding. Understanding that power taken isn't power earned, and love controlled isn't love at all. On Daniel's birthday, I visited the ocean. He loved the water. I sat on the sand with my shoes off, letting the waves touch my feet. I told him everything, about the apartment, the classes, the peace. I told him I was okay, and I meant it. As the sun began to set, I realized something important. The will didn't save me, the money didn't save me, the claws didn't save me. They reminded me. I had always been stronger than the way I was treated. I just needed proof, and now I had it. One final chapter remained, not of loss, but of beginning. The first thing I learned after everything ended was how quiet peace can be. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. I used to think peace meant nothing happening, but now I know it means nothing hurting. Mornings became my favorite time of day. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching people hurry past and feel no rush to join them. I had nowhere I was being pushed from, nowhere I was being tolerated. I belonged. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork, I found the original copy of Daniel's will. I read it one last time, not for the money, not for the clauses, but for the intention behind it. My son hadn't written it out of anger or revenge. He wrote it out of love, love that saw the truth, love that planned quietly, love that trusted me to stand once he was gone. That realization stayed with me, because for the first time I understood something deeply. We don't protect people we think are weak. We protect people we know are strong enough to survive the truth. Daniel never thought I needed saving. He believed I deserved fairness. Weeks later, I received a call from the community center. They wanted me to lead a small discussion group. Women my age, some widowed, some estranged, some discarded by families who decided they were too much. I agreed. On the first day, I stood in front of the room and hesitated. Then I said something simple. You're not here because you failed, you're here because someone else didn't value what you gave. The room went silent, then heads nodded, stories followed, and I listened, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had lived the question. At the end of each session, I told them the same thing. You don't have to be loud to be powerful, you don't have to fight to be firm, and you don't have to stay where you're not respected. Those words weren't advice, they were reminders. One evening, as I locked up the center, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Older, yes, but straighter, calmer, no longer shrinking. I thought about Claire then, not with anger, with understanding. She mistook control for strength, possession for love, and when control failed her, she had nothing left to stand on. I had something different, self-respect. And it had been with me all along. On the anniversary of Daniel's passing, I didn't go to the cemetery. Instead, I cooked his favorite meal. I set one extra place at the table, not out of sadness, out of gratitude. I spoke to him as if he were sitting across from me. I'm okay, I said softly. I'm more than okay. The truth is, losing him broke something in me, but it also revealed something. I was never powerless. I was just quiet. And quiet women, when they finally stand, change everything. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: never confuse kindness with weakness. Never confuse silence with consent. And never believe that age makes you disposable. Sometimes the final clause isn't written on paper. Sometimes it's written in the moment you decide you will no longer accept less than the respect you deserve. And when that moment comes, the room will go silent. Not because you raised your voice, but because the truth finally did. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories like this. And if you've ever had to start over later in life, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.